You've canceled plans before and felt something you didn't expect. Not guilt, not regret. Relief, like something heavy you didn't even realize you were carrying, just quietly lifted off your chest. And almost immediately after that feeling, another one showed up right behind it. A small nagging question. Is something wrong with me? Nothing is. But that question is worth sitting with, because what you felt in that moment wasn't laziness. It wasn't a character flaw, dressed up as a preference. That was your nervous system exhaling. And the fact that so many people spend years feeling ashamed of it, that's what actually needs examining. We live in a culture that has quietly, persistently treated solitude like a symptom. Like if you genuinely prefer your own company, there must be something underneath it. Some wound, some attachment trauma, some social anxiety, some deficit that drove you inward. And I don't want to sugarcoat this, because sometimes that's true. But other times, and this is the part nobody says out loud, a person just thinks better alone, feels more like themselves alone, recovers faster, loves harder, lives fuller when they've had enough of it. And we've somehow never built a cultural script for that version. Here's where it gets interesting. We've been asking the wrong question entirely. Instead of asking whether solitude is healthy or unhealthy, we should be asking why we were ever told it had to be one or the other in the first place. Think about someone you might know. Late 20s, works in marketing. Genuinely likes the people in their life. Not shy, not depressed, not damaged in any obvious way. But every time a group trip gets planned, a weekend away, a birthday party out of town, there's this slow dread that starts building in their chest about a week out. They go anyway, every time, because not going feels like a character indictment. They come back exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and for years they assume they just weren't social enough, like there was a more extroverted version of themselves they hadn't grown into yet. It never once occurred to them that they weren't behind, that they might just be wired to experience certain things differently. Here's what most people don't realize. In the 1990s, psychologist Elaine Aron published research on what she called highly sensitive people. The work wasn't widely adopted by mainstream psychology, but the findings have held up. Around 15 to 20% of people have nervous systems that process sensory and emotional information more deeply than others. Not more intensely, more deeply. That distinction actually matters. These aren't people who cry at commercials because they're fragile. These are people whose brains are quite literally doing more work per social interaction than the average person, running more processes, pulling more threads, and when you're doing that, you need more time afterward to defragment. It's not antisocial, it's energy management. So when someone comes home from a group trip and needs 2 days alone before they feel fully human again, they're not being dramatic. They're recovering from something that genuinely cost them more than it cost the person sitting next to them on that trip. And yet they will probably apologize for it. But here's the twist. There's this persistent myth, and I want to be careful here, because myths exist for a reason, that human beings are inherently social creatures, and that any deviation from that is a deviation from health. And yes, that part is real. Decades of research from the University of Chicago showed that loneliness activates the same neural threat responses as physical pain. We do need people, but needing people and needing constant people are not the same sentence. They are not even the same category. What the research on chosen solitude actually shows is something more nuanced. Psychologist Reed Larson spent years studying how people experience time alone and found that voluntary solitude, solitude that wasn't forced, wasn't punitive, wasn't the result of rejection, was consistently associated with improved mood and higher rates of self-reflection when people returned to social settings afterward. The key word across all of that work is chosen. Forced isolation can be genuinely corrosive. Chosen solitude is closer to the opposite of that, and as a society we've somehow collapsed those two things into the same category. We see someone eating alone in a restaurant and feel a reflex of sadness for them. We see someone decline an invitation and assume rejection, or depression, or something broken. We've built a social script where presence equals wellness and absence equals lack. And some people have internalized that script so completely, they've spent years, decades sometimes, performing extroversion just to feel more normal. Think about what that actually does to a person over time. When you spend years masking a natural preference, not a flaw, a preference, you start to lose the thread back to what you actually want. You go to the parties, you fill the silence, you answer the phone, even when you don't have the bandwidth for it. And all of that, compounded across years, creates this low-level exhaustion that most people attribute to work, or stress, or being busy. They never think to ask the real question. What if I've just been living slightly outside myself for a very long time? Let me ask you something. Ask yourself that, and actually sit with it. Because when you finally stop treating solitude like it's a problem to be managed, what it gives you is uninterrupted access to your own inner life. And your inner life is where your values actually live, where your intuitions get sorted out, where the emotions you were too busy to feel during the week finally get processed. Solitude is a very specific kind of fullness that noise typically prevents. And it goes even deeper than that. People who are genuinely comfortable alone, not avoidant, not shut down, but actually at ease in their own company, tend to have a clearer sense of what they think before the room influences them. They're more comfortable disagreeing because they've already had the conversation with themselves first. They've interrogated their own positions in the quiet before being asked to defend them publicly. It's a form of cognitive independence that's become increasingly rare. Now, I want to be honest here, because it would be easy to just let this become a celebration, and I don't think that's actually useful. Solitude can also become a hiding place. It can be the comfortable face of avoidance. There's a version of this where someone isn't recharging at all, they're retreating, and only the person inside that experience really knows which one it is. Recharging feels like restoration. It has a quality of fullness to it when you come back out. Retreating feels like relief at first, but it slowly curdles into something flatter: numbness, disconnection. If you've ever spent a whole weekend completely alone and come out of it feeling vaguely worse instead of better, that's worth paying attention to. Not as a judgment, as useful information about yourself. The people who seem to navigate solitude best aren't the ones who have made it an identity. They're not loners with a capital L. They're people who tend to something, the way you'd water a plant. They go inward, and then they come back. Usually more regulated, more present, more capable of actual intimacy. Because real intimacy requires a certain kind of presence, and that presence requires that you haven't already completely depleted yourself, performing connection you didn't have the energy for. Think about it this way. We live in a world that monetizes your attention, that profits from your boredom, that engineered entire platforms specifically to make stillness feel unbearable, to make a quiet moment feel like something that needs to be filled immediately. In that context, choosing to sit with your own thoughts undistracted, unperformed, is maybe one of the more quietly countercultural things a person can do. So if you felt that relief when the plans got canceled, if you've always felt slightly more like yourself in the quiet than in the crowd, I'm not here to tell you that's a superpower. That framing is just as reductive as the one that called it a flaw. What I will say is this: it's your nervous system and your psychology and your particular way of being in the world telling you something true about what you need. And the only real mistake, the one that actually costs you, is spending so long defending that preference, or hiding it, or apologizing for it, that you never actually use it. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing. There's more to explore about how your mind works. I'll see you in the next one.